So as you've just seen, a about 3 minute video showing off the game's creation and the game in full detail. One thing I want to start off is the game's creation. When I was looking through everything, I was looking through all the layouts and wanted to see which one was the most achievable for me. I looked at the vehicle layout and thought, this is for me, as I was most appealed by making a racing game, and I thought I had a few creative design choices which would make my game more interesting than me doing a twin stick shooter or a platformer, as I felt like there was more creative control for me to make a more fun racing game. The location and setting, due to the texture packs in the asset packs that we were given, it was quite difficult at first because I thought it was just going to be about sci-fi or futuristic, and that's a bit hard to link in a racing game. So I looked into forests and like ruins, and that's when they chose to try to go for a twin setting to make the location more appealing. So at first you're going to go through a forest, and then go into some caves, and then it leads into like a broken castle area over here. And I wanted to do the setting of a game of a broken castle, a broken area, and it's been overgrown by forests and trees and debris, and that's why a lot of the levels, a lot of debris, lots of rocks, lots of trees. I wanted to see like a broken down castle area, which was great, but due to time and it breaking down, it's now turned to this decrepit area which is abandoned. The design of the game, for me, it's a racing game. When I play racing games, I'd like to just time attacks. I'm very interested in the time attacks, just how fast can I go around a course. I'm not really into open world racing games. I much prefer tracks, and I feel like it's more fun for the player to do a linear track, which they can repeat over and over and over again to up their time, always. And the reason why I did this is for me, it's linking into my narrative of the game. The narrative of the game is a time attack, so you're going against someone else in their times to see who can go faster, and that is the narrative of the game. For me, it's like the car, the player is you can think about the narrative yourself. When I play this game, I think about maybe the other person who did those times as a family member, and you've got to beat those times to have bragging rights over that family member in the game. It's the narrative of your own mind rather than me trying to force the narrative down behind you to give it more creative freedom of why you're going around this track. The gameplay, I wanted it to be interesting enough up to the point where it felt unique to play every time you play it. So that's why there's a lot of curves in a lot of like caves area, because the unknown factor of this game makes it more fun for me. I feel like when you go through a cave and you don't know what's going to be on the opposite side, it makes it more replayable. Because once you learn what's on the other side, you can play through the game again to up your time and make it a lot more interesting for the player. And that's why I felt I did this choice of always having curves in caves for the unknown factor of when you play through it the first time, it's the experience of going around the map. But once you've done that, you can replay through it again and realise that it's all. You can realise that it's all done. It's like, oh, now that I know about this area, I'll replay it again, up my time. It's not just it's the layout of the loop-de-loop and stuff, adding in a ramp over here, just fun racing mechanics, which makes the game more replayable. Loop-de-loops and like ramps up in the speed of a car always makes the game more fun to play rather than just going at the same set speed. For me, gameplay elements, it's that racing mechanic and having the gear system has been extremely helpful from the vehicle layout because it's made it seem more of a realistic simulation. The main elements I focused on was the time attack system, making sure that the time attack system fully worked and making sure that it worked in all levels. So the benefit is that over here, it's like, oh, this is replayable on every level. All I have to do is link the level with the save game system, and I can change this track, this scripting to literally any level I can make, which makes it a lot more easy for designers, makes it a lot more easier for me to make a new level and instantly put it in and be like, all I need to do is add the tracker and it works. And another element I added was a boost mechanic. I felt like without this boost mechanic, the game got quite stale after playing through a few times because it's like, oh, I'm going at this set speed all the time. And so I realised if I make a boost mechanic but make it hard to use, so if you use it for too fast, you're going to go into a wall. If you learn to master this boost mechanic, it's going to up your time significantly, which to me increases the core gameplay, the main core gameplay loop of the game. For me, it ups it because it's like now that I know about this boost mechanic, if I learn when and when not to use it during the level, it can up my time, which makes me want to keep playing and master that mechanic. For the lectures, I use the lectures a lot. I think game testing was something I looked into a lot. So it was all about what makes this game fun and what makes it achievable. So I think now my responses for questionnaires is that a lot of people thought that the goal timer was a bit hard to use, so I had to change down the goal timers. In with the lecture on game testing that we did, it helped me realize that I need to make this questionnaire a bit more broad and open. So that's why I changed it to 1 to 10, so that people can look into if this is too hard. If I put it in a 5, that means I only have to maybe like half the timer down, so it isn't too hard. Another thing I looked into was narrative. The open-minded, the lecture about narrative and like Tetris, that people make a narrative out of their own mind based on the game of Tetris, which is what we learned from the lecture, and that's what I'm using for my game of the narrative of like Tetris. It's like you're making your own narrative up, so the game is more replayable. For me, how this game links to me is that when I'm playing a game, I like the fear of not knowing what's next. I like knowing what's next. I don't like it to be predictable. So it's really shown in the level design of the map. There's a lot of curves, so you can't see what's around the corner until you get around it. There's a lot of caves around, like in this area, and also in this area, because I like to show the players that you don't know what's next, and that's why I like a game is that I don't like to know what's next. I like the unknownness. It makes it more replayable, especially when you go through it the first time. The player interacts with the space like a racing game, I feel I've spent a lot of time myself going into making sure that there's no off curves, there's no off bits in the track to make sure that the player can just drive through it on this black track. If you go near this black track, it's going to be a smooth experience, but if you go off the road, it's going to be more harder to drive on, it's going to be more rugged, it's going to be more weighed down, because that's what I aimed it to be. It's that as long as you stay on this path, it's going to be a nice smooth racing experience. But if you go off road, like in a lot of places, it gets a bit more harder to drive on, it gets a bit more harder to race on. Technical areas, so blueprinting. Blueprinting was something I very much made sure was professional and standard. So if we go into all of my blueprints have been named, have been commented on. Because let's say if we were in an industry and I was just doing programming, the designer maybe there's an issue. The designer needs to go into here and understand what. So when I comment on everything, it's quite easy for the designer to look at it and go, oh, that's what that's for. And every single blueprint is being commented on to make sure, even for me, because you're making that many blueprints, I might get confused. I have to go back to it and be like, oh yeah, because I've wrote this comment, I know exactly what this blueprint does. And because of that, I feel like it just makes it a lot easier for me. The narrative of the level links to me. So the narrative of the level shows feeling to the player because, like I've mentioned a lot, unknownness, fear of the unknown. A lot of players get put off. If we don't know what's next, you've got to go dive straight into it. And because they don't know what's next, maybe they might slow down. So like that's going to cost them time. If there's a corner, they might slow down because they might not know there's a ramp. They might not know there's a loop-de-loop around this corner. They might not know there's a cave with some stones in it, which might bump them around and lose the time. And that links with the level to the player. If the player's driving through and going, I might need to slow down because I don't know what's around this corner, that's going to lose them time. It means they're going to do worse. They might not achieve the gold medal. So I've made sure it links to the unknown and the fear of it. Of if I don't know what's next, I might lose my time. I might lose the gold medal. Iteration testing. I think all games need testing. All games need to have this iteration of why. So I'm just going to go through a little image. So this was my first initial product of the map, and when I did a first preview in one of the seminars, someone told me maybe adding a track to the level would be more useful for the player because maybe if it's all green, it's going to get confusing to the player. And through terrain mapping and terrain editing, I was able to make a track around the map. So if we look into this photo now, there's a whole black track around the map. And someone else also said in testing that having all the rings for checkpoints visible is going to affect hardware, which it did. And now when we play the game, it is that every checkpoint gets updated. So once you go through the one, that one gets deleted and the next one's loaded up. And through iteration and testing as well, like I said earlier with my questionnaire, it was all tested. If the mechanics weren't fun, I'd look into the mix. So the boost mechanic originally, the car was really bouncy, and with the boost mechanic, it'd just fly and hit a wall and bounce 20 places. So I added mass onto the boost, so it made the car more heavier, which means there was less bounce added. Also, like I said with the timers, some people thought the timer was too hard to achieve. So because of this, I decreased the gold timer. And when they replayed for it again, they were able to get the gold timer, but only just. And they said that was a more fun experience rather than feeling pressured to not focus just because they needed that gold timer. And also for me, I think overall, I've been extremely happy with what I've learnt with Unreal. I think in the 6-7 weeks that I've went from not much idea with blueprinting, where now I feel like effectively I could keep working on this game and have a very polished and finished product in a few months, in a few weeks. And the knowledge of it all, what I've learned, has been extremely helpful to how to learn as a designer. I've learned a lot through the seminars, especially with the testing, having feedback from people and knowing maybe that doesn't work, maybe I need to look at it again. So with the track, I thought originally I didn't need a track because how the level was set out. People going, nah, it's confusing without the track. And I was like, now that I've got photos of iteration of like, we've went from this which is just a bit like bland with no track, to something like this, which looks like a full polished map which someone can play. It's a lot more. It gives the reason of why iteration is so important. And I think that's everything I need to state.